Hello everyone. The topic for the day is how to make API calls in a React.js project using Redux RTK Query. So first of all, let's understand what is RTK Query. So Redux is a toolkit or a package which is used to manage API calls in production level projects. And RTK Query is a feature which is introduced in Redux toolkit recently, which can be used for making API calls in a slightly better manner. So in today's session, we are going to understand how to set up Redux in a React project. Then we'll understand how to use RTK query or set up RTK query in our React.js project. Then in the middle of our session, we'll try to make API calls to some JSON API like the fake API of JSON placeholder and understand how to make API calls using RTK query. And towards the end of the session, we will share some resources for future reference. So that is the overall agenda of the session. And with that in mind, let's start coding for the day. So here we have created a new project using Create React app, and I'm just going to run yarn start to start my project. And I have removed all the stuff which was present in app.js and just add hello world. So when the server starts, we just be greeted with hello world in the text. The next thing that we need to do is we need to set up Redux in our React project. So let's start with that. So this is the official doc of Redux toolkit, and here you can find all the resources needed for setting up Redux or RTK query or documentation for various features which are present in Redux toolkit. So I'm just going to go into the quick start of Redux toolkit and install Redux toolkit npm packages to set up Redux into our React project. So let's copy this npm install, come back to our project, and let's install Redux toolkit and React Redux in our project. So we are running npm install because we are using npm package manager. Once Redux is installed, we can then start creating our store. Store is basically the main data point or the main node where the entire data of our Redux toolkit is stored, or where the entire data which is fetched from the queries is made available to other components. So we will create a store in our src folder with the name store. And it is basically a collection of reducers which can be used to make API calls basically. So here we go with index.js, and in this we will first import the configure store from Redux toolkit and set up our store using our configure store. And within that, we will add all the reducers which are necessary for making our API calls and making data available to the components. So let's copy this export const and add it into our store index.js. The next thing that we need to do is we need to set up a provider higher order component in our app. This provider will give access to the store variable in our entire project. So let's import store from this newly created file in our index.js file. So we come to index.js in our project, and then we write import store from /store. So the store variable which was exported in our Redux configure store component is now imported in our index.js. And next thing that we need to import is the provider component from React Redux. Now once this is done, we can then provide our store to all the components which need it by adding the provider component before our app component. So here provider, then store is equal to store. Store is basically passed as a prop to our app. And then we have the end of provider. So let's remove this end tag. And with this, we are done with the setup of Redux in our project. Now, if you want, you can create slices to create actions and stuff, but we are not going to do that in our today's session because we are more interested in RTK query and how to use the Redux toolkit query in our code. So for setting up our Redux toolkit query, we need to set up a services folder in our project. So we can either use services or APIs as the folder name. For now, let's just go with the naming convention which is provided in the official documentation, and let's name this as services. And within the services, we are going to create a post.js file within which we'll write the API calls for post API. Now for API calls, we are going to use this big REST API generator called JSON placeholder. And within that, we have the first API, which is to get post data in our project. And the URL is JSON placeholder db code post/1. This will return an ID, title, body, and a user ID in the response. So let's try to use this query or this URL in our code. So for Redux Toolkit query setup, what we need to do is we need to import a create API and fetch based query component from Redux Toolkit. So let's do that. And we have imported the create API and fetch based query in our post.js file. Then we'll use these two components to create our API call setup. So in this case, we have an export const with Pokemon API. For our case, we will use post API and we'll use the create API for rest of our code. So let's copy this first line and add closing brackets. So instead of Pokemon API, we are going to use post API. Now within this API, we first set up the reducer path. In our case, the reducer path will be post API. So basically, this is the path which is used by the store in Redux for getting the API call ready. And then we will set up the base query. Base query is basically used to set up the base URL for our API calls. In our case, the base URL is json placeholder.tpcode.com. So I'm just going to copy this base URL and add it into the base URL section. Once this is done, then we can start off with creating our APIs for getting the data. So endpoints is the section in which we write our API calls. So let's copy the endpoint section and paste it here. And the first API that we are going to use is get post or a single post. So get single post or get post, whichever seems fine. Then within the query section, we are going to add post, and instead of name, we are going to fetch the first post from JSON placeholder TP code. Now there is a naming convention which is used when we are exporting this API endpoint to our component, and the naming convention is to use the word use before the post name and query after the name. So whenever we are trying to fetch some data, we use this naming convention, or we convert this API to a hook, and that hook has a name which use, then API call name followed by query, and then export it to our code. So let's copy this code and paste it in our post.js file, and instead of using get Pokemon by name, we are going to use get post query. So use get post and then the query, and we are using post API. So instead of Pokemon, we will go with post. So with this, the setup for Redux Toolkit query is done, or 50% done. The next part is to make this post API available in our store so that we can import it into our components. So in this reducer, we are going to add the query, and the process to add the query is to first import the post API into our store. So we go with import, then the API name, in our case it is post API from, then we can get out of the folder, get into the services folder, and import the post API. I hope the name is correct. Yes, it is post API. Then it's save. Then let's make this post API available in our reducer, and for that we make use of this path. So we just replace Pokemon API with post API, and we are more or less done for fetching the data. But just to unlock the advanced feature, we can also add this middleware. For now, this middleware is not required, so that is why I'm not adding it into our code. Then also store dispatch is again used for some advanced purposes. It is not required as well. Now we have already added the provider component in our code. The next thing that we need to do is we need to make use of this query in our code or our components to get the data. So for that, let's just go back to app.js, and here we will import our hook, which was exported in our post.js file, which is use get post query. So I'll write use get post query from services and post. Then we can write const get post response is equal to use get post query. And let's just try to log the response to understand what is happening internally in our get post query. So we write get post response in console.log and hit save. Then we will run the project using yarn start. Now if we open our console in our browser, we see that we have the get post response. The first thing that happened is it sets the internal variables like this. Current data and data are the variables in which the data from the API is stored. Until and it is not fetched, the values are undefined. Then there is an isError variable which is used to be set to true if there is some error in fetching the post. Then isFetching is the variable which is executed or set to true when the API call is made or the data is being fetched from the server. IsLoading is used for similar purposes. IsSuccess is used to denote whether the API call was successful or not. And isInitialized is for some other purposes. So initially the isLoading variable is set to true. Then once the data is received from the API call, the status is set to fulfilled and we have the data in the data variable like this. So we have the body, the ID, the title, and the user ID in our code. So what we will do is until and unless the response is not loaded, we will show loading in our project. So for that we can write if get post response dot is loading, which is a variable to know whether the API call is been made or whether data has been fetched from the server, and we will return div and some dummy text like loading. So initially when the data is being loaded, the loading text will be shown and then the API call data will be shown in our browser console. Now the next thing that we can do is if there is some error, we can print out the error as well. So for that, we have the isError variable present in the get post response, which is present here. So we'll write if get post response dot isError, then we can write return div and error occurred. And error will be returned as get post response dot error dot error. So now we are going to print out the error, and for that we'll use get response dot error dot error and it's save. Now let's just say if I change the URL to some invalid URL and it's save, then as you can see we have the error printed out in our page which is failed to fetch. So it is present in the error part of the data and we have the error name which is failed to fetch. Now once the error part is done, then we can actually print out the data which is present in our API call response. So we remove the hello world and within that we can write div, then get response or get post response dot data dot, let's just say, title. We wrap it in curly brackets. It's saved. And as you can see, we have a title from the post. So this is the first way in which we can receive data from the API, which is to use get post or use query kind of syntax. The next part of our session is to create some data onto a server, that is to make use of post or put query to push some data to the server. In case of JSON placeholder, we have a post API for creating a resource in which we can actually push the data back to the server or create some entry onto a server. So let's just see how to do that using Redux query. So whenever we are trying to create some data, instead of using use query, your notation, we make use of something called as mutation. So mutation is an endpoint which is used to create something on the server or to delete something or update some data onto the server. And the syntax is similar to query, only changes is we make use of builder.mutation instead of builder.query. So let's try to understand this by creating an API. And for that we write create post, then instead of builder.query, we'll go in builder.mutation, and within that we will write query like this, and within that query we can get the data. So in our case we are going to get title, then the post body and user ID as our params from the component, and instead of method fetch we write post, then instead of post ID we will use post directly. So if we go back to JSON placeholder, we can see that we have the post endpoint, which is to create the post in our code. And in this body, we'll pass the title, the body using post body, and the user ID. So this is how the mutation looks like, and there is a change in syntax for this. So for any kind of mutation, we write use, then create post, which is the name of the API, and mutation. Then we get this mutation into back into our app.js, and we can import this. And there is slight change in the way in which this mutation is called. So for this, we write const square bracket. We can write create post and the result of create post. So create post result. So there are two variables available instead of one, and we write use create post mutation after that. Let's just say I want to create this post on click of a button. So we'll add it with a button with the name create post, and on click of this button we will create the post onto a server. So on click be added here, and we will create the post. So in this case we will write create post handler, and we will go with function create post handler, and within this function we'll call the create post variable to send the data to the server. So in this case we will write the title, like some generic title, then post body, some dummy text, and then the user ID. Let's just say user ID is 1, and hit save. Now we can see what is all is happening in our mutation by logging out in the create post result variable, and hit save. Now we come back to our page and let's just see what all happens. So initially the create post result is uninitialized, that is it is not called, which is why the status is uninitialized and all the variables are set to false and is uninitialized is set to true. So once we click on create post, the pending status is set, that is the create post data is been sent to the server, and then it is fulfilled in which the create post data is successfully sent to the server. So if we come to the network tab and click on the post variable, we can see that the data is sent to the payload is sent to the server, which is body, post body, title, generic title, and user ID. And in the response, we get the data as title, generic post, and all the others. So what we can do is if we want to log this data somewhere, we can use the use effect hook from React. So we can write import use effect from React, and in this case we go with use effect, We will monitor the create post result. And we can add a condition like if create post result dot is loading is equal to false, and then create post result dot is success is true, then log the data using console.log. So you can write create post data and create post result dot data. Hit save, and I think we can comment out the upper console.log. And now let's just check what happens on create post. So as you can see, we have the create post data back from our server with title, body, user ID, and ID. So in case of code, the process is same. So instead of create post, we can write update post. Then instead of method post, we can write put, and all the variables are same. So if you want, you can add the put API and then pass on the data and get the result. So the process is entirely same. So I'm not getting into the put API right now. Let's just go with the next API call, which is the delete API. So in case of delete post, we again use builder.mutation. Then we write the query. So this all is present in the mutations part as well. So update post, then delete and all the other stuff is present here. So we can go with query, then URL and method delete. So we can take some ID from the URL and delete the post from the server. Now delete post is again a mutation. So we write use delete post mutation. Then we import it into our app.js. Then similar to create post, we have const delete post and delete post result is equal to delete post mutation. Then we can write use effect for this as well. And monitor the delete post result. Then we can use the similar kind of syntax. So if delete post result dot is loading is false and delete post result is successful, then we can write deleted post data and delete post result. And then we can add a button here as well for deleting the post. So we can write delete post handler, and here we write delete post. So we copy this function, and here we write delete post, and we are passing the ID, I think, into our query. So we will write ID and let's just say 1, and it's save. This will be post. Let's just check with the JSON placeholder deleting the resource. Okay, it is just a URL. So yeah, this would work. And then we come back to our page. I think there is some change required in the use effect. So this would be an in an array, and let's say. Then if we click on delete post, after some time we have deleted post data, and in the network tab, if we go with delete post, Okay, so we need to use it like this and hit save. As you can see, the first post got deleted and we have success in our response. So this is how you can use the Redux RTK query for running CRUD APIs, that is create, read, update, delete APIs into your project. Now I will share the link to the various sections from which we use the code in comment section or in the description of this video, and hope you found this video useful. Thank you for your time and see you all in the next video. Goodbye.